The time, mid-August in Clayton, New York. The place, the Antique Boat Museum. This is the Antique Race Boat Regatta 94, an event co-sponsored by the Antique Boat Museum and the Antique and Classic Boat Society to benefit the museum. Regatta 94, an APBA-sanctioned event. As spectators looked on, the boats of yesterday and the boats of today took to the waters of the St. Lawrence River, each driver showing just what their boat can do. There were the big names in boating circles, names like Schroeder, Byers, Deeth, all participating in this second regatta. But before all of the activity could take place, each driver had to be briefed on the course outlay as well as the do's and don'ts of this year's exciting event.
If you go out, everybody in every boat must have a life jacket, just to start out with. No question, life jacket in every boat.
For other boating enthusiasts, just bringing their antique boats for display was rewarding enough. And many of them had a fascinating story to tell.
Well, it's what they call a tractor unit because it pulls. The idea of the prop being ahead, and of course the prop is running in clean water, so there was about 2 mile an hour speed advantage. But about 1934, they banned them because they were really a lethal weapon. You know, like in the well. I mean, there's lots of people get their arms cut off with a normal prop where there's a lower unit protecting it, but this thing, just, you know, like if that hit you, if you fell in your boat and somebody hit you, you were dead, you know, type of thing, or maimed very badly. And the fish didn't like it either. You know, it was suicide on the fish.
I started in about 1954 at Lake Tahoe, California. We had a summer home for many years there, and I took a fancy to boat racing right away. As soon as I could kneel down, I got into a race boat. And
how did you happen to choose the Swift?
Well, the Swift was very synonymous in those days. It was really the state-of-the-art boat, and I chose it because they were plentiful on the West Coast.
This is an Evinrude 22 horsepower service motor or fishing motor, and we done some modification so it was adaptable for racing.
What did you do to it to make it into a...
Well, we put this different carburetor on it and put it on a shorter drive shaft housing and probably high dome pistons to raise the compression a little bit, and a high-pitch prop with less blade area would let the motor turn up better.
One after another, the drivers continued to strut their stuff. It offered a unique blend of excitement and a bit of nostalgia for those who attended. Antique Race Boat Regatta was the scene of constant activity. As the drivers continued to circle the course, other boat owners and drivers were getting prepared for their turn on the water. as large cranes lifted the treasured boats from their trailers, placing them in the water. For some, a glimpse of boat restoration provided an education. Still others marveled at a close-up look at speedsters like the legendary Alter Ego, a boat built by Paul Sawyer and designed exclusively for speed. Alter Ego, owned by Bob Schroeder, was the first propeller-driven raceboat to shatter the world record of 200 miles per hour. The Chrysler Queen was there, too, a boat which held the record for the flying mile in the 7-liter class, set in 1958 at more than 151 miles an hour. Remembering the past was a big part of Regatta 94. Some of the real pioneers of today's super-fast boat racing came to show everyone just how far the sport has evolved.
I went to about the Gold Cup Regatta in Greenwich, Connecticut, the Indian Harbor Yacht Club. It was right across the station from the station, and I walked over there, and I noticed, and all the boats were this type, and they're all flipping and flopping around. So I said, that's for me. And so on the way home, I got a copy of Popular Science that had a design of it, and went home and told my father, this is 1 week before the race up at Lake George. He said, get in the car, we'll go get the parts. So we did it, threw it together in a week.
You built the boat in 1 week?
We can, with a little help of the neighborhood. And my father overseeing it and seeing it made it right. But the only trouble was they called for a sim out here, but we were rushed too much already to do that, so we just went as it was.
Preparations for this second raceboat regatta began long before the actual event. The director of the Antique Boat Museum, Bill Danforth, and his staff spent countless hours, days, and months orchestrating the fine details of this year's event. During a driver's meeting, they were among the first to be told of the many rules and regulations for the regatta. Rules and regulations imposed by outside organizations, and still others imposed by the boating organizations themselves.
Included in your packet was a letter from me concerning safety, and it concerned several things. First off, this regatta is sponsored by the APBA as a special event. As such, we are required to have insurance, and the insurance company has a great deal of regulations that we need. It would be impossible to put on an event like this without insurance. It's an important part of the thing, and in order to continue, we have to run under those rules, and there's no other way to do it. We have other rules that are imposed on us by the Coast Guard, local police, fire, and things like that. So understand, these aren't things that we thought up. They are things that we must do if we're going to continue to have it. Several areas are of immediate concern to us. One is the race course itself. You've all been out there, or a good number of you have been out there, and we've observed that it was sort of going around in a circle. We're going to have procedures for that, and I'm going to ask the pit chairman to explain the course chairman, explain how we expect you to enter and leave the course, when you go out, and those things. We also have some problems in launching, moving trailers around and things like that. We'll ask those pit bosses to explain that to you, too. And as you know, the fellow in charge of the pits, he's the boss. So no argument with whatever he says. You do what he says, and we'll get along great.
As the excitement continued to unfold, at least one crew suffered disappointment. Not performing to expected standards, the Thunderbird cut short its regatta run. Pit crews pulling her from the water to discover the problem, a breach in the boat's underside. Away from the action, boat restoration was a big feature at Regatta 94. Hundreds of thousands of dollars and hours spent bringing classics back to life. This particular boat, which was on display at the time, had no name. Its owner not only involved with restoration, but is attempting to document the boat's name and its racing history. The Miss Severn of 1922 vintage recently was restored by its owner, Jerry Davidson. The Miss Severn is a Miss APBA boat that has undergone some changes.
It started, has an interesting background. It started as a Miss APBA, and it was begun by the Wooden Boat School, by a class at the Wooden Boat School, under the direction of Steve White, as a matter of fact. And I had picked up the plans for it in 1980. And was interested in building one, and then I found out about this one. They had been started. Some work had been done, but a lot of it we had to undo. But then I got interested in doing this particular one, Miss Severn, which was one of the original Miss APBAs that was altered in the 30s with this bridge deck. And it's one of the few you'll ever see with the bridge deck and the bench seat, fore and aft. Most of them have bucket seats.
Right, two throne seats.
Right, and so I started working on it myself. Then I hired a young fellow who's around here, Ted Westerfeld, and he worked with me for the bulk of a year. It's a 3-year project.
Now, was he from the landing school? Is that where he got?
He had gotten his education at landing school and had worked in a couple of boat restorers, and was looking for, as a contractor, he was looking for a project. And so he was ripe for the job, and he worked in my cellar. The two of us worked together for about a year and a half in my cellar with it. And then Mark Mason, who's a close friend of mine, was involved along the way, gave a tremendous amount of input. The guy really has tremendous insight and insight.
Mark's good on the details. There's no
good on the details, I'll tell you.
You got the dash here. I hope you got some footage.
Well, Mark and I debated this. I live in Florida in the winter, and he's, of course, in New Hampshire. There were nights when he'd send me 4 faxes of what he thought this dash ought to look like, but I already knew, you see. I had the dash all done a year ago, and he would keep sending me stuff, and I keep saying, isn't that nice? It's going to look like that. And then, midway through the project, I worked with Mark's crew and at his site, and no work was done on the boat unless I was there, because I wanted to work with everybody and essentially do the job myself and run the job and make all the decisions on it, which was fun. Way late in the project, we decided to put this Rolls in it. 6 months ago, we decided to put the Rolls in it.
What model engine is the Rolls?
This is the Rolls Meteor, and it's mechanically the same engine as the Merlin that everybody knows about. It's a 27-liter, 1,650 cubic engine, but it is detuned to the extent that the supercharger is taken off it. And in fact, it's used in a tank. And I don't know as you saw it or not, but that big yellow monster over there is what it looks like when we start.
Well, it sure looks beautiful now.
It is. It's nice running, and Miss Severn originally ran a Curtiss Conqueror, so we had very good confidence you could put this size engine in it and run it.
I noticed that this boat, compared to other Miss APBA hulls, rides better, and I think it's because it has the larger engine.
I think so, too. I think it doesn't go jumping all over the place, let's face it. She cuts right through anything.
So what'd you say you're turning for propellers?
We're turning an 1833, and it's way underpropped. Because we can crank it up to, we've had it at 2950, which is a lot more res than we want to run. We want to run around 2600, something like that.
Yeah.
So our next step is an 1833 4-blade cup. And we're going to see if that kind of holds things down to reason.
For many antique boating enthusiasts, racing offers its own brand of excitement. For others, there's just as much personal pleasure and excitement bringing the old boats back to life. It's a collector's way of preserving the past, and for one such collector, a nationwide hunt was initiated to accumulate the entire collection of a specific boat design.
A year ago, I went on a quest to find one of each of the Swift models that were built, and became successful in that after literally hundreds and hundreds of hours of telephone calls and travel.
Well, you've got a beautiful, beautiful fleet of Swift boats.
Thank
and I
you.
understand it's to credit also the gentleman with you that,
Yes.
that the woodwork was being done by Stuart Sill.
Yes.
And these were they in pretty good shape when you started, or were they pretty rough?
Pretty rough.
Well,
Varying states of disrepair, but all it takes is a lot of time, a lot of money, and
Yeah.
a lot of checks, and nothing to it.
did you make drawings of these boats as you repaired them, or was that necessary, or were they available?
No, they were totally restorable. It took a little ingenuity here, and we're pretty familiar with the Swift boat because, as Tav did, I raced them in the 50s. So.
You also raced
Yes, he did. Very familiar with the Swift line.
Well, you've done a beautiful job. They're really
Thank you.
beautiful boats. And Bill McKeever, it's
Yep.
my understanding that you're the engine man in the group. Is that right?
Yeah, well, I was flattered when Tav asked me to help him out on the motors, and they're a little easier to move around in the shop than a boat is, so you can work on them in the comfort of your home.
Now, were you particularly familiar with Mercuries before you got started with
Very.
this project?
Yes, I also used to race. I started in the late 50s and raced principally the two-cylinder Mercury classes, the B class with the 20H Mercury through 1979.
Part of the nostalgia at Regatta 94 was observing the various boats on the course, and in the case of John Dertinger, remembering just how long the races were in days gone by.
Well, we used to run, for instance, in the Niagara River, or the places I'm familiar with, the small lakes, or I'm thinking of one of the most famous races I was at was in the Detroit River, in Detroit. And
So how long was a heat in one of those races?
well, it usually be 3 laps on a 1 2/3 mile course, or 4 laps on a 1 mile course. About 4 miles, 4 to 5 miles.
Plenty of hard work went into laying out the course for this antique raceboat regatta, and explaining it all to the drivers offered a challenge. The drivers, of course, had plenty of questions.
I don't see anything wrong with the regular boats just coming off the course here and going around in. I don't see anything wrong with that at all. Does anybody else object to that? That's fine. The regular boats will just come off the course and come through, and the hydroplanes, if they have to, if they need the extra space, will do the loop. If they can make an easy right-hand turn, they can do the same thing.
Yeah, that in?
Yeah, that in.
Just keep right on going out.
Yeah.
Now, when I come back, I'm gonna come in.
When you
I
come
gotta
back,
Well, I can't
You'll
come
come
back
down.
that way. I'll have to come in.
Yeah.
Helmets have to have them for hydroplanes, but you don't have to have them for racing runabouts.
right.
Antique Raceboat Regatta 94. Not only a unique event, but an exciting one as well. An event which offered plenty of fast-paced action and plenty of chances to look and remember back to the way it used to be. Now there's the chance to look ahead to the future when the next Antique Raceboat Regatta is held. As we close, the director and staff of the Antique Boat Museum wish to thank its many sponsors and volunteers. Without them, this event may not have been possible. A hearty thanks to all corporate and individual sponsors who helped make this event possible.